values should not be something we're grappling to try to understand. It should jump out at us like that animal that says, no, I will not be put to sleep, you know?
We record this podcast on Gadigal land in Sydney and pay our respects to all First Nations elders, healers, and storytellers. As therapists, we recognise the wisdom that lives in land, body, and spirit, as well as the queerness that runs through nature's veins. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to the Gestalt Me Gently podcast. I'm Dabaco and I'm here with my queer compadre, Matthew Bergen. This is the conversation where we look at the intersection of queer identity, Gestalt therapy, and what's happening relationally in the zeitgeist. Matt, how are you arriving this morning?
I'm arriving feeling quite buzzy. It's 7 a.m. in the morning here. I'm feeling like I've had a coffee, so a little bit of excitement. And yeah, it's nice to be back in relationship with you, Tobacco. I'm also excited about a guest that we have with us here today. And looking forward to the next hour and feeling a sense of, belonging here. So yeah, I'm definitely alive. How are you arriving today, Tobacco?
I'm partway through my coffee, so I'm just noticing my body adjusting to that morning wake up. And I also, as well as the caffeine, I noticed some excitement moving through my system because I'm also really excited about this chat. We're talking to our first international guest this morning. So buzzing in a few different ways.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I'm going to share a little bit about our guest this morning, a queer man by the name of Mark Fairfield from New York. Mark has a history as a Gestalt therapist, writer, academic, coach, consultant, and activist. He is what I would call a modern day Gestalt heavyweight. Mark, as I understand, emphasized the importance of the relational aspect to contemporary Gestalt therapy, which birthed the Relational Institute in Los Angeles and here in Sydney, where myself and Dabaco did our training. He's a founding member of the Relational Center in LA, a not-for-profit community organization providing affordable psychotherapy to communities, as well as Gestalt training. The Relational Center believes that strong relationships and community connections are essential for well-being and resilience. The center also incorporates social justice principles like anti-racism into its work and advocates the dismantling of oppressive systems. Oh, I love that bit. Today, Mark is an executive leadership coach and organizational consultant. Mark, I'm already feeling the tingles in my nervous system with that arousing introduction. How are you arriving today, Mark?
Thanks, Matt. I'm intrigued. I feel really available to connect and share with you, and grateful for the chance to be in connection with my Aussie partners in crime. And it's good to make this more sort of formal introduction with the two of you. So I'm happy to be here and have energy. It's not first thing in the morning for me. It's yesterday for me. It's yesterday afternoon at 4 p.m. But I'm got good energy and happy to dig in.
Beautiful. And in the lead up to this chat, Mark, we did have a little bit of a yarn with Ash Power, who's the director of the Relational Institute Australia, very influenced by your work. And she tipped us off to a few things that, we should get your take on. And she's also been a guest on this podcast. So if you haven't heard our chat with Ash, go back to that episode for sure. Often we talk about, lineage and heritage with our guests. And she mentioned that it would be worth talking to you about, a particular member of your family. You have some Sicilian heritage, I'm aware, and a Sicilian grandmother. And I'm really curious what your grandmother might have taught you about love. She said there was an interesting piece there to ask you about, and I thought that could be a nice place to start.
Yeah, that's very sweet. She's a true friend and another sort of co-conspirator. So um, she gave you good advice. Uh,
She often does.
Yes.
yeah, I bet. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that. Yeah, I often bring in my relationship with my grandmother as a source of learning about how we know we're loved,
Hmm.
which I think in a such a data-driven field is an important way to ground kind of the concept of evaluating outcomes, right? And that if we think about, and we can talk about how we stand for inclusion and diversity and ensuring equity and justice and fairness. And those are all really important words, and I love them. But I think at the end of the day, we really mean how do we make sure people know they're loved? And my grandmother's, connection with me helped me to understand that you never should have to guess whether you belong, whether you're embraced, whether you're important,
Mm.
whether you're valued. If if you're not clear on that, if you have questions about that, that definitely says something about the culture of the environment and the system that you're navigating. One thing about Sicilian culture is you walk into the room and there is no ambiguity. You get instant, loud, unambiguous signals that you are loved, you belong there,
Mm.
people are glad to see you. In fact, they're angry they haven't seen you before now. you know um no one's on the fence, no one's a bystander.
Mm.
Everyone takes that stand, and they use their words, they use their bodies, they express, I think, in a way that just leaves no doubt. So if you're hated, and if you're loved, you know. And so I've come to really appreciate the clarity of that,
Mm.
and it's a standard, a bar that I feel like I've set in my own work and in
Mm.
my important relationships.
As I hear you say that, I just feel this wonderful like series of kisses coming onto my face and hugs and my cheek being squeezed and like just this aliveness in my body as you express that kind of familiar dinner table food, love, stories. Yeah, no, it's really a strong image. Thank you.
Mm.
So I acknowledge that we probably have a similar lineage in the sense that I'm a 16-year-old queer man, and I sit here today, with my little memory of the ACT UP movement, which was very impactful around, well, in America and here in Sydney as well. And I acknowledge that your history, you speak about how the fight against AIDS in many a way mobilized you in the way in which you rose and created support for the community at that point in time. So yeah, I'm just curious about how you're inspired by the fight against AIDS, and if you care to share a little bit about how that early period informed your body of work or your approach to your relational aspect of connection.
You know, it's a timely question because my experience of how people in power responded to the AIDS crisis was not all that different from my experience of how people in power responded to the kind of relentless bullying that I had to bear in school. And in fact, that experience taught me a lot about fascism,
Oh,
um, because, fascism, as it happens, relies heavily on establishing a social hierarchy, and consolidating power through a kind of extreme nationalism fueled by hatred of those at the bottom of the hierarchy, which basically takes a page from the book of what we would call middle school education, in which young people are sort of cultivated to be cruel and violent. And that phenomenon, uh, the bullying crisis, the bullying problem, is then further expanded upon and kind of installed and institutionalized through the phenomenon of bystanding, which is essentially the disaffection of most of the people, who are standing by watching, the disengagement from the felt experience, from, the ability to connect to the suffering of those who are upon whom violence and cruelties are being perpetrated. And so it's this whole kind of machine that I just spent years and years of my formative, life, my young life, watching, obviously, being abused by, but also kind of developing a perspective around. And I think, having the Sicilian grandmother as a sort of source of protective factors in the face of basically being hated, deeply, deeply hated by an in group, um, I guess kind of helped me not implode, helped me not give up, and helped me sort of maintain some perspective that I could later retrieve. And the retrieval of that perspective is a lot of what happened when I came onto the scene of, the AIDS crisis, which was in full swing, in my late teens, and certainly by the time I graduated from uni and moved to New York. Um, I grew up in Los Angeles. Um, uh, it it just was a crystallizing moment, where I just got super activated. Either I'm going to be a bystander or I'm going to take a stand. I'm going to step into this crisis and I'm going to say, no, no, this is not okay. No, we are not going to, um, uh, victimize, and, perpetrate violence and cruelty on, what you're now conveniently calling this out group, this, hated, underclass, as it were. Um, I mean, I guess I was positioned to take a stand in a way that I wasn't when I was in my young years in school. So I had supports at that point in my life, my early 20s, that I certainly didn't have, at the age of 11 when the violence started against me. So I really got that leadership is an equation. It is the product of crisis or challenge or adversity, the clear realization that if you were supported, you could actually do something about it. And the invitation to take a role in doing that. And that happened for me, at the height of the AIDS epidemic. Um, I actually, did my social work advanced internship on an inpatient, unit at St. Vincent's Hospital, which was at the epicenter in the U.S. and in Greenwich Village and New York City, and started to do a lot of sort of community building with caregivers, and sort of started looking at the importance of relationships as our opportunity to coordinate something other than bystanding, as our access to the resources that we need to have the courage to stand up, and again, as the doorway to love, which is sort of the biggest protective factor that we can get our hands on when we're under threat of annihilation. And I guess I see this moment on the world politics scene, but again, back to, kind of ground zero here in New York, as, this moment of choice, of kind of getting off the fence. And I'm definitely inspired to see people getting off the fence and taking a stand, but also sort of deeply disturbed at how many more people are standing by and not getting activated, despite people being rounded up, immigrants, queer folks, particularly queer trans folks, who are the new underclass. They're the new sort of targets that some shared hatred of helps to sort of galvanize this amalgamation of populist power, that's then being used by oligarchs to in fact destroy the planet and funnel all wealth away from the people. So I mean, it's such a thing to be beholding, right? To be watching, like it's a theater production, and yet it has such powerful resonances to the AIDS crisis and back to the playground, back to middle school, back to the bullying experience that I'm so used to. So for me, fascism is always there, and the threat of it is always real, and I have always felt at risk of being annihilated by it. I just think that at the moment, right now, a lot of people who aren't used to that are now feeling like they're in the crosshairs, and being targeted, and it's troubling, to a larger number of people. Maybe that should reassure me, but ultimately, I'm also seeing how much power is being consolidated, in really horrible places.
Thank you for bringing that into the present day as well, because I know I've spoken to a few folks in the queer community here who are really concerned about what's going on in the States, particularly for trans folk and, undocumented people in the States getting swept up and deported by ICE. And it feels very turbulent and uncertain. And I notice as I'm even putting words to it now, like my nervous system's starting to get a bit tense. So I really appreciate you bringing in some of that, because I know there's many questions here from community in Australia about what's going on, what is actually happening there, and your boots on the ground, our first international guest on the podcast. So I'm really grateful that you're sharing a bit more about what's happening in the relational fabric of the country that you're in. I also get reminded of something that I've heard from you, because unfortunately we couldn't have the live version of you in our training, but there was a pre-recorded tutorial that you took
Yeah.
us through when we were studying at TRIA, and something that was quite a striking visual and striking metaphor was when you were talking about bodies down the stream. And I'm wondering if, yeah, you could talk a little bit more about that, and maybe if there's some, applicable part to what's going on in the States right now as well. But this idea of the bodies down the stream and how to approach that. Are you able to talk a little bit more about that metaphor?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I often, you know, sometimes I get the sense that speaking of Sicilian, that I can be, quite annoying about this on this point. Particularly Gestalt. Gestalt is an emancipatory model.
Mm.
That was born at a moment just like this one, as a response to fascism.
Mm.
And Gestalt, you know, is deeply concerned with what happens to creativity, vitality, life itself when the body and nature is dominated and overcome and becomes immobilized and desensitized, that we lose this essential power and resource for agency, for that we need in order to have agency, in order to stand up.
Mm.
And I love that there are so many empathic resonators who are drawn to, the field of mental health. And, there's no, certainly that's not an exception for folks who are drawn in particular to Gestalt therapy. And so I might use the metaphor to describe that moment of, we're starting to notice bodies floating down the stream, and we drop everything, and we're compelled to run to the river's edge and try and fish the bodies out.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense, and I don't see anybody not doing that, who sort of
Mm.
respond to that call. But for me, it doesn't take very many bodies before I start getting curious about how they're getting in the river in the first place, right?
Mm.
And so that idea of, what's our strategy for sending some search party up the stream to take a look at what are the conditions that are leading to so many people being hurt, being damaged, being traumatized, being injured. Yes, we have these important resources and skills and strategies and tools for healing and for repairing, but it feels, my sense of the promise of the Gestalt movement, particularly given what gave rise to it, is something more than just that, something around getting activated to build a healthier world that listens to the body, that pays attention to what nature, what our relationship, the relationship between our bodies and nature may be saying to us about, what's sane and what's not sane, about kind of how to live on this planet. That curiosity, which for me just was impossible to quiet, um, is a lot about kind of what took me more towards activism, and frankly also towards just what I would call better strategy, like how to integrate prevention and promotion and education and culture building into this sort of what we have called Gestalt, which I think is really a movement about, you know, inspiring humans to be in a saner relationship with the planet and with each other, and to rise up against, you know, conditions that industrialize our bodies and desensitize our skin and immobilize us so that all we do is just sit and watch bodies floating by and kind of show up to the grindstone and do our thing in this very kind of detached way without kind of taking a step back to see, like, hang on, this whole thing is my world. This whole world is my environment. What is my ability to respond? What are the creative opportunities that, as a human animal, I have, you know, at my fingertips? And if there are systems and institutions and cultural traditions that are telling me that there's nothing for me to do, Gestalt comes on the scene, you know, to reawaken me to my creative opportunity. And so it feels very aligned, you know, with the legacy that we've inherited, that we have resources to share with other humans, you know, that can help keep us alive and engaged and fighting for life and engagement for ourselves and on behalf of others and other species even, you know.
Thanks for that, Mark. There's so much in that. And yeah, I'm just kind of letting that settle. Yeah, as I was listening to you, I was just feeling into, um, you know, the bodies down the river, such a strong analogy. And how do we at the top of the river mobilize enough to be in relationship with one another, to have sufficient support networks to hold, to create belonging, where, you know, difference isn't seen as a dismantling threat, and ways to support one another. And I work on I volunteer actually on a queer national mental health line. And it's really interesting just speaking to queer people around Australia and just really feeling, you know, the similar impacts that are occurring around loss of connection and loss of belonging. And the themes are very similar. And like it really, you know, impacts me to sit and receive that information. And you know, I think it's a global reality. It's definitely not just geographical. Um, and yeah, I'm just thinking what are ways that we can come together to create, you know, this top of the river supports. And I'm just curious to know whether you might have anything that you care to speak about as to, you know, how you or organizations around you at this point in time are doing that work.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, I retired my post at the Relational Center back in 2018, so a number of years now, and have kind of built an allyship with my colleagues, Cedar Landsman and Lucien Damaris. Lucien's been also to TRIA and has also delivered some sort of somatic oriented trainings to TRIA students and participated on the faculty. So many folks potentially listening to this will know who Lucien is, but Cedar and Lucien founded a new organization, or it's no longer new, but they founded a separate organization called Relational Uprising. And it was essentially has as its focus, you know, training organizations and groups and movements sort of to do exactly, you know, what you're asking about, which is like how to liberate the resources that we need in order to stay engaged and protect our relationships and be more successful in our sort of efforts for collective action just so necessary for fighting things like fascism, right? And so the core curriculum, which we refer to as relational culture, it's a culture building strategy that has a lot of overlap with Gestalt, but also has done a lot of kind of expanding on the opportunities. And it's really looking towards how we can cultivate really a kind of shared, insightful awareness that includes a deep empathic attunement. We call it sharing resonance, which is drawn from the social neuroscience research about limbic resonance. Sometimes it's referred to as empathic resonance, but basically just this amazing resource that exists because our nervous systems are not discrete and separate from each other, but are actually very much kind of synced up in this wireless network called the human, the sort of the mammalian condition, not just human species. And that there are really important ways for us to tap into that resource, and one that is very handy and in some ways quite easy and a lot of fun, to utilize, is the sharing of story. And we teach, a story structure that's kind of designed to maximize on how much empathic resonance will get activated. And that story structure really is built around what the resilience data has uncovered are the key protective factors that vulnerable groups have when they have access to them, are able to face adversity and not be destroyed by it. And they're simple protective factors, like people around me have confidence that I will rise to this challenge. I have something important to contribute that gives me leadership in overcoming this adversity. There is a system surrounding me that gives me care and support in the face of difficulty. And the resiliency research kind of came up with this data by basically looking at all these people faced very similar adversities. Half of them died, ended up in prison, ended up in abject poverty, and half of them thrived. What was the difference? Same adversity. What did these people have that the others didn't have? And it kind of came down to access to these factors that are now considered to be protective in the face of adversity. Most of these studies were done looking at youth because, of course, young people are categorically the most vulnerable people in our society, but it's certainly transferable and applicable to any vulnerable group. If you're vulnerable and you're facing adversity and you have access to these factors, your chances of thriving in the face of the adversity increase exponentially. So we built these sort of story frameworks around the protective factors, helping us use storytelling to inquire in a communal setting into how any of us have encountered scenarios where these things came together, where they converged, where we did have access to these things. And the more I share about that kind of encounter with other people, the more powerful the collective empathic resonance is that we cultivate. And that if we can get on that frequency with each other in some kind of regular way, we build deep relationships that enrich the possibilities of collaboration in the face of very, very difficult challenges. So that's an example of some tools, and sort of within the context of, if you just think about like relational culture, like how do we bring a relational culture to any movement, any political movement or social movement, to a campaign, to a project, to an organization, to a church, to a, any effort where the success of, the successful embodiment of its purpose depends on people doing well at acting together. And I think, there's a lot threatening collective action in the form of dominant culture that doesn't want people to succeed, right? So just consumer capitalism, individualism, populism, forms of collectivism that, threaten relationship by keeping people from finding value in each other's really interesting diversity and variety, right? And in remembering and holding on to the precious resource of love, which of course
Mm.
it makes sense that we will recoil from if in our experience, when people have told us they love us, they also abuse us or neglect us or require us to suppress, who we are, to betray our bodies, to betray our sensibilities and our values.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing. I feel a similar inspiration moving through my body that I was noticing back when we were students at TRIA and you were taking us through this social impact project module. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about all the different ways a relational approach, or all the different layers of society a relational approach can be brought, because you know Matt and I are both Gestalt therapists, and I know that the psychotherapy model can be a little bit inaccessible for a lot of people. I mean, it is quite a privileged model, and I think you've spoken about this a little bit before. I remember Ash kind of reminding us, um, and I guess I'm curious also about what relational means to you in like an elevator pitch kind of sense, because I talk about it a lot. I describe myself as a queer relational therapist. Like, it seems to be this kind of word that gets thrown around, particularly in the world of Gestalt, as a relational style of therapy. But I feel like you have molded your life around a relational approach, and it feels important to get your kind of elevator pitch, I guess, on what is the relational approach to you.
In a really simple way, when we're emphasizing the relational, we're attuning to where we're situated, which includes the land we're on, which then should inspire lots of curiosity about who else has been on this land, how has this land been used, what has happened on this land,
Mm.
how do I relate to this land? Do I think I own it? Do I think I conquer it? Or do I steward it? Do I respect it? Right? And where we're situated in relation to one another, what are the lineages of relationships that have given rise to me, not just as a body on this planet, but as a soul, as an identity, as a personality, as a leader, as a pollinator of culture, whether I'm doing that willingly and in awareness, or whether I'm doing that more implicitly and out of awareness. What am I propagating all around me? What's my impact? What's my footprint? What am I entangled with? What is it impossible for me to ignore my complicity in? um in the simplest sense, it's entanglement. And it's not just entanglement over space, but also over time throughout history. And, when I think of entanglement, that takes me right to the idea of, field theory and Gestalt as well, right? The idea of the field is really about a web of entanglement and kind of understanding there isn't just empty space between you and me, but we are deeply entangled with each other. And I can scarcely do a single thing, without potentially, affecting the possibilities for what someone else will or won't do. And so really thinking about what that means to me around what actions I take, what choices I make, and my expectations of what actions and what choices are possible, not just for me to take, but for other people to take. If I have expectations that other people should be able to change this or adjust that, how wise is that expectation? Do I have the Gestalt insight? Am I encountering the field in a way where I'm appreciating the reality of how the ground is structured, of all of the different elements of, what is the challenge that we're trying to overcome in this moment, and how does that shape all of the motivations of all of the people, that I'm encountering? So it means a lot, obviously, but but I think to a large extent it's also just about having an orientation, and a value and a kind of moral commitment around looking at life and experience through that lens, which, yes, there are moral implications, but I also think there are implications for intelligence. Like, I think it's dumb not to look at life through that lens. I think we're going to make really silly mistakes strategically, if we don't come to understand that things are happening the way they're happening because very complex conditions are coming together to favor that outcome. And if we want a different outcome, I reckon it's going to take a deep understanding of how those things are coming together to make that possible, so that we can start intelligently interacting in subtle ways with those conditions. Right? Gordon Wheeler said, if you want to see a different outcome, then cultivate the field conditions that favor that outcome. What will support the change that you want to see? You can try to demand it, you can try to coerce people into making it happen, but I guarantee you that the moment that you've left the scene, no one's going to be invested in continuing to do the thing you coerce them to do. So how is that change going to be sustained? And maybe it's short-sightedness that keeps people from thinking that way. Maybe they don't really care so much about whether change lasts a long time. Maybe they just want it to last long enough to take credit for it. But at the end of the day, if we really care about the state of the planet 12 generations from now, I should think it would show in the way that we approach the problems that we're trying to navigate. So that's, to me, what relational means. And of course, that has implications in all kinds of fields, and certainly in the psychotherapy, frame, there are all these implications. If we look at that work right through that lens, yes, we're going to get really interested in the relationship that's forming between the therapist and the client, maybe more than one. And, we're going to understand the change process in a more sort of complex way. But I think, taking the therapy hat off and kind of asking that question, what does relational mean, in this kind of more expansive way, kind of, I think, in a way, sort of leads to and points us to creative opportunities to use our agency in all kinds of different ways. And I think that that's quite exciting.
Wow. I'm just feeling the cup overfloweth, and yeah, just sitting in this wonderful sense of gratitude that Mark, that you put your best foot forward in the world, and just how you resonate and, you know, talk and walk the walk. And I'm just really appreciative that this is happening, and this opportunity to sit and talk with you, and yeah, for myself to learn, and also for our listeners to learn, and just get that sense of breadth that you have. And as soon as you spoke about seven generations forward, is like, yeah, that is a field condition. I was just like, we don't have a lot of time to do this work, to make an imprint, to stamp, the here and now, and create some social change and some social agitation. So yeah, I'm just feeling a sense of appreciation. So I just wanted to mention that.
I'm really curious, Mark, what you're up to at the moment. You've done so much, established the relational center. You said earlier that you moved on from that in 2018, or passed the baton. And I'm also aware that you were doing some social justice work with trans community. What are things looking like for you at the moment?
I've mostly been coaching and consulting to leaders of kind of big change-making organizations. I've worked a lot, particularly in the last 8 years. Certainly had a long-standing engagement with the New York Civil Liberties Union, which is the New York affiliate of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and which is, sort of was founded basically to cope with fascism. So, that feels like a good bed to climb into, for me at the moment. But, have also been doing a lot of sort of culture building and leadership development work for a lot of different social justice organizations and projects, kind of as a consultant since I left my post, at the Relational Center. And you mentioned, yes, that I was involved in doing some gender justice work, in the trans community. And certainly at the time, and some people will be familiar with some of the work that the Relational Center did through its Leadership Institute over 10 years ago, hosting public conversations for, I think at the time we hosted one of the largest public conversations, a World Cafe, that brought together a lot of trans folks who, had previously not had the opportunity to be in dialogue with each other, despite, all, sort of occupying space somewhere in the greater Los Angeles area. Definitely supported some organizing work, hired a trans organizer to do some relational organizing work in the LA area at the time, and supported some, important organizations, Gender Justice LA kind of being one of them, the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, being another. There was a lot that we were able to do at the Relational Center through this thing that was called the Leadership Institute. Hosted 3 international conferences, titled The Relational Turn, that brought together people from all kinds of different fields and disciplines who were in some way promoting and moving forward the relational agenda in their work, but not doing it in conversation with each other. And, I really have seen it as my role to host larger conversations, to partner, to raise awareness of this sort of question of how do we protect relational values that are so under threat. And I think that there are a lot of people doing important work that has a stake in that. And how important is it for them to have relationships with each other, and to be in deeper communities. So I'm always interested in finding more ways to support a whole community of practice to come together around this sort of question of relational culture. And certainly building capacity for training institutes was definitely a part of that agenda. Trio was kind of my home base in Australia, but definitely supported other Gestalt institutes there and elsewhere, kind of trying to help them think about the story of Gestalt in its most coherent form and how not to lose that, right? Like, how do we keep that alive, this emancipation of the human animal, and those pro-social, distinction of the human in the human animal formula is also very important, right? So that I do a lot of consulting and a lot of coaching and teaching still, even though I have stepped out of being an executive director, which comes with so many other tasks like building a donor base and doing fundraising and that sort of thing. But I continue to be concerned about making sure that there are institutional resources and an infrastructure to protect this work. I think there are institutions doing this work, but there isn't one that exists exclusively to protect this work so that it continues to be done. And that is the legacy that I feel called to, is to make sure that 12 generations from now, that people recognize that this is an important body of work to continue to build upon and promote and protect. And so in everything I do now, I'm very much, focused on, using it as an opportunity for that.
It's such a impressive legacy that you have built, continue to build. So many accolades, so many ways that you in your work seem to be pulling together relational threads and tying them and reconnecting them and allowing that contact to be made. Again, I'm noticing this sense of inspiration moving through me, and I'm maybe to lean into the field and trusting the field as a way to close our chat. I'm wondering if you might be able to give us a few pieces to think on around how to, for us and listeners, how to kind of figure out what are the values that are important to me, and how to start thinking about identifying them and moving towards a relational way of protecting them. Maybe this is a whole workshop, but now I'm asking you to kind of give us a 30-second transmission of your life's work.
Before we go there, sorry to pause. I'm a bit excited
jump
too.
in.
So clearly we bring you back, Mark, and have many episodes with you. But there was one thing that landed in the training that we did, which was really simple. You said, wake up your animal. And I really got some charge from that. And it's kind of like, yeah, what is my beast? Or is it, a fish? Or what is it? And I'm feeling kind of jellyfish for myself, with tentacles that can wrap and extend and create connection to creatures around, and also just float really silently, but travel without being seen, and be close to the surface and be deep at the same time. So I'm kind of really vibing jellyfish vibes. I'm just curious to know whether there's a segue, Mark, into this question that Dabaco's asked you about waking up your animal. What is your animal, and how that might relate to the social justice work that you're doing?
Yeah. It's so relevant to the queer experience. We, so many, particularly in my generation and older, right, our generation, so many queer people couldn't put their animal to death, couldn't succeed in putting their animals to sleep, right? It was the animal, in fact, that woke up to say, you are different. this does not work. For if you try to do this, you will die, and if that's a resource, I mean, obviously there was a time when many people thought it was a curse. It was a death sentence even. But if you think about it, from this sort of Gestalt perspective of a man, how do we emancipate that, the social animal in us? Like, any way that your body will not let you comply is a beautiful gift, a beautiful energizing gift. So I would say, and so, like, thank the gods for that gift. If we remember that values are not concepts but stakes, that value, when we're talking about values, we're talking about, what am I willing to pay to protect? And pay could mean, sure, empty my bank account, but it could also mean stick my neck out, endure ridicule for, stand in harm's way to shield, right? Like, values should not be something we're grappling to try to understand. It should jump out at us like that animal that says, no, I will not be put to sleep, And so if we're that out of touch with our bodies, no wonder we're out of touch with our values, right? So there is something, I think, about adversity and struggle that is enlivening, that gets us connected to what is deeply important to protect. And so this story work is often actually really helpful at reawakening for people things that they care about, by retracing the steps of, what have I thrown my body in front of historically? What have I been willing to take heat for? What have I been willing to save up all my money and pay for? That's what I value. And it may not align with what I've been told I should value, or what I've been telling people that I value. And so that can be upsetting. But I do think that's how we know. And then the next question, yes, is, what has supported me to be able to take those risks, to really stick my neck out as far as I have? What are the relationships that have supported me to do that? And that's where we start to get into the territory of, who's in the trench with me. Those are the blood bonds. The blood bonds are not the family. Those are the bonds of water. The blood bonds are the bonds that we form in the trenches. The blood bonds are the bonds that we form by bleeding together to protect what is precious for a cause. And those bonds are stronger than any. And so if we can find each other in the trenches, we will have community that is beloved and powerful and deep.
What beautiful words to end our chat on. What a lovely gift having you join us this morning, Mark. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark. My mind is blown and it feels fucking amazing. And just thank you for being such a radical person. I love it. I love it. I love it. So we look forward to having you come and return to Gestalt Me Gently if possible. Yeah. So in our little tradition, we like to kind of just check out and just see how we're landing, checking out. So yeah, I wouldn't mind just checking in with you, Mark, how you're landing at this point in time in this closure of this little container today.
Yeah. Well, that empathic resonance that I was talking about, I'm feeling it a lot of, very energetically. I'm feeling that with you, and it creates for me a lasting, sort of sense of connection. So when you say, you'll come back, please, it's an easy yes, because, there's there's vitality here, in the way that we're, synced up, in what's important to ourselves and to each other. And I just don't take that for granted. I don't ever get enough of it. There is never enough of it. So I'm very grateful and don't take it for granted, to have your connection.
Lovely. Dabaco,
Yes.
on this last little moment here, how are you checking out today?
I'm noticing my animal, my spirit, my soul singing and sending some tendrils out into the world. It feels like, something's awakened and vibrating and humming and singing within me.
Oh, beautiful. Well, look, that brings us to a close today.
How
Thank
are
you,
you
Mark
checking out,
Fairfield.
Matt? I'd love to hear a little checkout from you too.
Look, I'm tingling. I'm alive. I feel activated. I've got the same feels I had when we did this lecture with Mark a couple of years back, and it brought me to be more potent in the world and to be more brave. And I feel that same sense of bravery, and I feel push behind my spine to kind of take those lunges forward. So I feel alive. I feel alive.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Mark. Sending
Thank
lots
you,
of
Mark.
love. And
Love back to you.
we'd love to have you back sometime in the future on Gestalt Me Gently, and go gently into the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye. Bye.